September 11, 2001 will be remembered as one of the most frightening days in American history. But it also set in motion one of the greatest humanitarian responses our nation has ever witnessed. Numbers hardly do credit to the work of the American Red Cross in the days and weeks following 9/11. As a measure of its efforts, however, they are telling. In the 6 months after 9/11, more than 52,000 American Red Cross volunteers helped provide assistance to almost 55,000 family members who had lost loved ones, people who were seriously injured, and those put out of their homes or work because of the tragedies in New York, Washington, and Shanksville. In this same 6-month period, 231,000 turned to the American Red Cross for emotional support and grief counseling. 2 million meals were served by the American Red Cross in the 6 months following 9/11. I'm honored to have been a small part of this effort. For several years prior to 9/11, I was on the Red Cross National Disaster Mental Health Registry and helped staff shelters during a few national disasters in the northeastern United States. About an hour after the second plane struck the World Trade Center, I was called by the Red Cross informing me I would be deployed to Manhattan. I was busy at Hartwick, as were many Hartwick staff members, organizing our own local response here. But I also had a sense of duty and knew that if called upon to help out in Manhattan, there would be no other choice but to say yes. I was a member of the first mental health unit to respond to the tragedy. At the beginning, we were a very small team of only 20 counselors, yet in our first 2 days at the Armory on the corner of 26th and Lexington, we processed 3,400 family members of the missing and first responders through the Family Assistance Center. We performed what we called emotional first aid and psychiatric triage. Now, those are fairly technical terms, but in reality, what we did is we provided a shoulder to cry on, a sympathetic ear, somebody to hand a bottle of water to a person when they were dehydrated. In fact, we jokingly called ourselves the Water Boy Brigade. It wasn't counseling in the traditional sense at all. There were no offices. There was no sitting down. It was mostly work that was performed standing up as people waited in line, or people needed a break from waiting in line. What were the lines all about? Well, the lines were, unfortunately, to search the mountains of lists of the missing. And unfortunately, as the days went on, the lists of the deceased. We worked with Mayor Giuliani's office staff to search and file missing persons reports on behalf of the families. We did death notification meetings with families. We worked 14-hour shifts. We often fell asleep fully clothed that night and then woke up the next day and did it all over again. It was very intense, emotionally and physically draining work, but I want to emphasize it was also the most gratifying work I've ever done. And the reasons why I say this is what I'd like to focus on. For that brief period in our nation's history 10 years ago, we were united as one people. And that made the grief and suffering of those most affected a bit easier to bear. The tremendous outpouring, as Senator Stewart mentioned, of support from fellow New Yorkers, fellow Americans, and fellow citizens of the world bolstered the spirits of the affected. The amazing resilience and character of New York, a city that always shows its best side during adversity, has left a lasting impression on me. New Yorkers, in my admittedly biased opinion, are simply put the toughest and yet the most compassionate group of people on the planet. If one has to undergo a tragedy or challenge on any scale, there's no better group with which to be associated. The families of the lost and the first responders from the New York Fire Department and New York Police Department gave me so much more strength than I ever could have hoped to give them. Their ability to survive and even thrive during tough times is what I remember most, and what for me is the lasting legacy of 9/11 10 years after.